The digital world has carefully constructed a very loud and chaotic image of the United States. You scroll through endless social media feeds, and the complaints are identical across every platform. The world says the people of America are deeply arrogant. The world says they are excessively loud and obsessed with their own importance. People from other countries often label them as ignorant to the struggles of the rest of the planet. The global consensus seems to dictate that this is a nation built purely on ego and endless noise. But if you travel to a specific plot of land in Virginia today, you will watch that entire fabricated narrative collapse in real time. It does not collapse through a grand political speech or a massive military demonstration. It shatters against a single and repetitive sound. You hear the sharp crack of a metal shoe heel striking a solid stone floor. Let me introduce you to a traveler from the United Kingdom. He crossed the Atlantic Ocean carrying the exact same heavy baggage of prejudice that the internet feeds to all of us every single day. He wanted to see the reality of the country for himself. He wandered through 6 or 7 different states to test his theories. He interacted with the locals in diners and walked the busy streets. He realized very quickly that the people he met were surprisingly kind. They were genuinely welcoming and polite. But his ultimate revelation did not happen in a bustling city center or a crowded stadium full of screaming fans. It happened when he walked through a set of imposing iron gates into a vast and perfectly maintained field of the dead. He stepped directly into the most expensive silence in America. We spend so much time measuring the power of a country by looking at its economy or the aggressive posturing of its politicians. We look at the shiny and distracting things. But the true architectural foundation of any superpower is completely invisible to the casual observer. It is hidden in the meticulous way the state treats its fallen citizens. I am going to show you exactly how the loudest nation on the planet behaves when it is forced to remember the brutal cost of its own existence. By the end of this story, you will understand why a simple tourist visit completely destroyed the deep biases of a foreign skeptic. You will see the undeniable truth that the modern internet actively tries to hide from you. Arlington is a place that defies every single established rule of modern tourism. When our British visitor arrived, he immediately noticed the strange and heavy friction between the living world and the dead. This is a massive logistical operation. Tour buses constantly navigate the winding asphalt roads of the property. They swallow up large groups of people from all over the globe and release them into the sprawling green landscape. You have families on their summer vacation. You have energetic school children. You have foreign tourists seeking a quick photograph for their social profiles. Under normal circumstances, a crowd like this would generate a massive wall of chaotic noise. But Arlington somehow strips away all of that frantic energy. You look out across the rolling hills, and you are immediately confronted by an endless ocean of white marble. The sheer physical scale is difficult for the human brain to properly process. These are not just old historical artifacts meant to be casually observed. You can walk toward the eternal flame at the resting place of John F. Kennedy. You can stand there and feel the immense historical gravity of a murdered president. But the real institutional power of this place does not come from the famous names carved into large monuments. It comes from the endless geometric rows of identical white stones. Every single marker you see represents a breathing human being with a pulse and a future that was cut short. A son who left his mother. A daughter who never returned to her husband. A loyal friend who vanished into the grinding machinery of war. They are the actual human currency that purchased the freedom and the comfort of the modern world. As the British traveler walked deeper into the heart of the cemetery, he noticed a profound physical shift in the environment around him. The casual chatter of the tourists began to die down. The frantic clicking of smartphone cameras became slow and hesitant. People began to walk differently, and carry themselves with a sudden stiffness. It was as if a heavy physical blanket was descending over the crowd. The institution was not asking for their respect through signs or verbal warnings. The institution was demanding absolute submission through the sheer volume of the sacrifice on display. The visitors were voluntarily surrendering their own voices. They were actively participating in the most expensive silence in America. We are talking about a fundamental clash between basic human nature and the weight of state memory. It is incredibly easy to mock a powerful country from a safe distance. It is easy to point out their deep political flaws and their highly publicized cultural missteps. But when you are physically standing in front of the actual price tag of their society, the mockery instantly dies in your throat. You're standing on sacred soil that requires absolute reverence from anyone who breathes the air above it. I need you to stay with me as we follow this traveler all the way up the hill to the absolute center of the cemetery. Because what happens next is not just a standard military ritual. It is a moment of pure psychological pressure that will force you to question every stereotype you have ever believed about the people of this country. As the British traveler walked deeper into the heart of Arlington, he had to carefully reconcile the physical reality around him with the digital lies he had been fed. He had spent weeks exploring the vast geography of the country. He had crossed the borders of 6 or 7 different states before arriving in Virginia. He had actively searched for the terrible and arrogant Americans that the internet constantly warned him about. Alongside the quiet country roads, he found ordinary people living peaceful lives. Alongside the loud city streets, he found kindness and unexpected hospitality. But how does a foreign skeptic process that extreme gap between a global rumor and the absolute truth on the ground? He kept moving up the hill toward the center of the cemetery. The sheer volume of the dead creates a suffocating physical pressure that you cannot escape. You look to the left, and you are confronted by a son who never had the chance to grow old. You look to the right, and you see a daughter who surrendered her entire future for a piece of cloth. Alongside the grand historical monuments like the Kennedy gravesite, you find the quiet and devastating tragedies of ordinary friends. Alongside the perfectly manicured lawns, you find a brutal and meticulous accounting of human destruction. Can you imagine the heavy psychological weight of standing in the exact center of that much concentrated loss? The logistics of this place are staggering but completely invisible to the untrained eye. The tour buses continue to navigate the winding roads without disrupting the peace. They drop off thousands of individuals from completely different cultural backgrounds every single day. Hundreds of loud tourists converge on a single location in Virginia every single hour. You even find modern conveniences hidden in plain sight. The traveler noticed you can actually charge your phone right there on the grounds. It is a striking collision of everyday modern necessity and sacred historical memory. But the noise level of the crowd actually drops the closer they get to the plaza. Why does a massive group of diverse and easily distracted tourists suddenly decide to aggressively police their own behavior? The answer is the invisible architecture of state power. The environment itself demands total compliance without ever asking for it. The endless rows of white marble force you to lower your voice. The sheer scale of the sacrifice forces you to walk with a heavy and respectful step. And then a sudden noise cuts through the thick and heavy air. A voice booms over a public address system and echoes across the stone plaza. It does not welcome the guests with a warm and energetic greeting. It does not offer friendly instructions for a standard tourist attraction. It delivers a direct and uncompromising command to the crowd. The voice informs the onlookers that an army wreath-laying ceremony is about to begin. It states clearly that this strict ritual is conducted solely to honor the unknown. The military is officially presenting arms to the soldiers who lost their names and their identities to the violence of war. And at that exact moment, the chaotic spinning of the outside world completely stops. Thousands of people are standing shoulder to shoulder on the viewing plaza. You have local residents and you have foreign tourists. But nobody moves a single muscle. Nobody speaks a single word. You can hear the gentle wind blowing across the concrete. The British traveler stands perfectly still in the middle of the crowd. He watches the ceremonial guards execute their duties with a terrifying mechanical precision. Every single uniform is immaculate and perfectly pressed. Every single physical movement is sharp and deliberate and calculated to project absolute discipline. The only sound left in the entire world is the rhythmic impact of the metal heel plates on the guards' shoes. Click, click, click. Every strike of the boot against the stone echoes across the plaza like a gunshot. It is a slow and heavy metronome marking the passing of time for men who have no time left. The traveler watches this display of absolute reverence, and he completely loses his ability to speak. The travel vlog he was filming loses its casual purpose. The words completely fail him in the face of such immense gravity. He had traveled across the ocean with a mind full of internet stereotypes. He expected to find a nation of loud and arrogant people. He expected to find a society obsessed with ego and endless self-promotion. But as he watches a powerful military force lower its weapons out of respect for anonymous bones, his entire worldview shatters into a million pieces. He is standing face to face with the most expensive silence in America. This is not a cheap political stunt designed for a television broadcast. This is a deeply human moment of raw grief and institutional reverence. The crowd remains frozen in place because they are paralyzed by the weight of the moment. The absolute quiet stretches on for what feels like an eternity. The traveler realizes that he is witnessing the true soul of a nation stripped of all its loud marketing and political posturing. He is completely speechless because he finally understands the brutal physical cost of the freedom he enjoys every single day. The arrogance he expected to find has been entirely replaced by a crushing wave of humility. The noise of the internet has been permanently erased by the profound silence of the plaza. He stood there and realized that every complaint he had ever heard about this country was suddenly irrelevant. People call Americans evil. People call them bad people who only care about themselves. But the traveler looked at the faces in the crowd. He saw everyday citizens wiping tears from their eyes. He saw parents quietly explaining the meaning of the ceremony to their young children. He saw a collective act of remembrance that requires zero political affiliation. The institution of the military was not flexing its muscles to intimidate an enemy. It was turning its massive power inward to protect the memory of those who had nothing left to give. The sheer contrast between the loud and toxic debates on social media and the pure respect shown by these ordinary people is staggering. It proves that the foundation of the country is not built on the shouting matches you see on the news. It is built on the quiet understanding that everything they have was paid for in blood. I want you to pause and really think about the psychological impact of that specific scene. When you picture that lone guard marching in perfect isolation while thousands of people hold their breath, what do you actually see? Do you see a meaningless military ritual from a bygone era? Or do you see a powerful institutional tribute to human sacrifice that the modern world desperately needs? Go down into the comments right now and tell me how you interpret that level of extreme discipline. I need to know if you think this kind of silence can actually change the way the world views a global superpower. When the British traveler finally walked away from the tomb, the separate pieces of a massive puzzle began to snap together in his mind. Let us look at the actual forensic evidence he collected during his time on the ground. He did not simply fly into one major city and declare himself an expert on the American condition. He spent serious time navigating the complex reality of 6 or 7 different states before he ever set foot in Virginia. He actively went looking for the evil Americans that the global internet community constantly warns us about. He searched for the extreme arrogance that dominates international news coverage. He looked for the bad people that supposedly make up the vast majority of the population in this superpower. Instead, he found everyday citizens who were incredibly amazing. He found locals who were remarkably nice and welcoming to a completely skeptical foreigner. The internet had explicitly promised him an ugly and chaotic society. The physical reality he discovered was completely different. The deep and profound respect he witnessed at the cemetery was not an isolated incident. It was the ultimate institutional expression of the culture he had been exploring for weeks. He looked around the vast property and saw that every single detail was immaculate. Everything was perfectly clean. The groundskeepers treat the grass with the exact same reverence as they treat the marble. The guards treat the unknown soldiers with the exact same dignity as they treat a fallen president. He watched as every single person in the crowd voluntarily stayed completely silent to pay their respects. Nobody had to threaten the tourists to make them behave. Nobody had to yell at the crowd through a megaphone to put their phones away. The institution of the cemetery relies entirely on the shared cultural memory of the people. This is the profound truth that completely destroys the global stereotype. Alongside the loud political debates, you have a quiet and unbroken chain of reverence. Alongside the aggressive foreign policy, you have a domestic population that drops to its knees in front of anonymous graves. Alongside the massive physical footprint of the cemetery, you have the invisible emotional toll carried by the citizens who visit. You cannot build a society of pure arrogance if the absolute core of that society is built on honoring ultimate sacrifice. The loud and aggressive image of America is actually a defensive shield. It is a loud exterior protecting a very quiet and somber foundation. When the British traveler stood there completely speechless, he realized that the world has been aggressively misjudging the fundamental character of this nation. The extreme politeness of the military guards and the absolute cleanliness of the stone markers are not just aesthetic choices for a tourist attraction. They are physical proof that the country remembers exactly what it cost to build their modern empire. They pay a massive amount of respect to the regular people who sacrificed themselves so that others can be free today. The traveler admitted that he genuinely enjoyed America. He absolutely loved exploring America despite everything he had been told by the media. But the most important revelation from this entire journey goes far beyond the perfectly aligned headstones on a hill. We currently live in a digital era where it is incredibly profitable to hate this specific country. Social media algorithms are specifically designed to feed you videos that highlight the worst political arguments and the most embarrassing cultural failures. It requires zero intellectual effort to sit thousands of miles away and declare that Americans are fundamentally bad people. But the British traveler proved that the digital narrative is a dangerous and deliberate illusion. He crossed the ocean with his head full of imported lies, and he let the physical reality of the ground cure him of his ignorance. To truly understand the architecture of this society, you cannot look at the loudest politicians shouting on a television screen. You cannot judge them by the chaotic noise of their election cycles. You have to stand in the exact center of the most expensive silence in America. You have to feel the crushing weight of thousands of strangers completely stopping their lives to honor a soldier who does not even have a name. The tension between the loud rumors of the world and the quiet truth of Arlington is the defining paradox of the United States. The traveler left Virginia with his respect for America growing bigger and bigger every single day. He experienced a moving reality that completely erased the toxic noise of the internet. The United States is a massive and complicated institution with a very messy and imperfect history. But their capacity to halt the frantic spinning of the modern world to remember their fallen is a breathtaking display of true institutional power. The arrogance the world sees is often just the thick scar tissue of a nation that has buried far too many of its own children. The next time someone tries to sell you the tired stereotype of the loud and ignorant American, you need to look them in the eye and ask them a very specific question. Have you ever stood in the heavy quiet of Arlington and listened to the clicking of the shoes? We are going to continue pulling back the curtain on these massive institutional narratives to show you what is actually happening behind the global noise. We are going to keep tracking the real stories of power and human sacrifice that shape our modern reality. If you want to understand the hidden mechanisms of truth that the internet actively tries to hide from you, do not walk away from this channel. Stay with us as this investigation continues to unfold, because this is not just a destination, this is a moment of reckoning.